Welcome. As some of you know, I really like to throw big pots like this one, or even bigger. I usually throw them in sections that are put together. I also like to do textures like these ones, where I throw a cylinder, throw some textures on it, and then expand it to make the textures more dramatic. But what I haven't done before is combine the two methods. So that's what I'm going to do today. There are some serious challenges in combining the two methods, throwing in multiple sections and using expandable textures. Because when you're throwing in sections, you want each part to be semi-dry, because otherwise they won't sustain the weight when you put them on top of each other. So in other words, when I throw the first section, I try and make the shape that I want. And when I put the next section on, I also try and make the shape as much as possible the way I want. Because it is a little more dry, it's more limited how much I can shape it after I put the sections together. But with these kind of textures, where I first throw a cylinder and then expand it to dramatize or make the textures more vivid, I needed to be able to expand a lot. I haven't done that with sectional throwing. Even though theoretically it is possible to put sections together that are more wet than what I usually do, the risk of it collapsing is huge. So my challenge today is to try and find that perfect dryness that is dry enough to sustain the weight, but it's still wet enough to be able to expand after I apply the textures. I will do 2 pots, as I usually do, because then if one of them fails, I still have the other one. Also want to try out 2 different kinds of textures. I'm going to use a scratch texture, and I'm going to use the Steve tool. Both of them is demonstrated also in one of my previous videos. So let's go ahead and do that. I will be making 2 pots, 2 sectional pots. And they're basically going to have 2 sections. I may add a small section at the top to do something there. But the main part of it, and where I'm going to do all the expansion, is going to be on the 2 sections. I'm not going to make them super big for this test, because it's just to see if I can actually get the right consistency of the clay with the sections, soft enough to be able to expand them, and still hard enough for them to sustain the weight of the next section. I'm gonna do first section first, 5 kilo of clay. It's not super big, maybe to some of you, but it's not too bad. I'm not going to spend too much time in this video showing you how I throw the sections and how I basically put the 2 sections together, because you already seen that. Oh, maybe I will show you a little bit more about how I put them together, but not so much the throwing part. So I'm going to skip over that on high speed and move to the more interesting part with the texturing and expansion. So unlike when I do my normal sectional pots, I'm not going to do any shaping of the sections, because I want to keep a straight cylinder so I can do the scratching in my my Steve tool, and then I will do the expansion. So now we have a relatively straight cylinder, and I'm not going to do a groove or any things to connect it here, because I'm going to keep it relatively soft, as soft as possible, soft enough that I can still expand it, strong enough so it will sustain the weight of the next section. So I will dry it a little bit, and then I'll remove it and make the other button section, because then it can firm up a little bit. In my experience, it works better if you let them stay there for an hour, two, something. So we're going to do the next section now. Oh yeah, and as always, the important part about the sectional throwing is that it's very, very straight at the top, because if it's a little bit wobbly and you try to connect the next one, it's just not going to work so well. So now I'm going to do the next one, basically the same as the first one, about 5 kilo straight cylinder. One thing I didn't talk about in the first one is that I'm going to keep the walls thick for 3 reasons. First of all, it's sectional pots, so they need to be stronger than if you're just throwing one pot out of one piece of clay. The other reason is I want to expand them after I put them together. And I'm going to add the texture, which requires, as you remember from my texture video, a little more thickness. So all those reasons, a little thicker than I would usually do. So that was the second cylinder, almost the same as the first one. So now I will let them dry a little bit, and then I will do the second section and put it on top, and then we will do the fun stuff with the texturing and expansion. Yesterday I didn't get time to finish my pots, but that's actually okay. I wrapped them up in plastic so they didn't dry out too much. And that actually gives the pot a little bit of time to settle. And I don't know exactly why, but in my experience, it actually makes them a little more stable when you have to add the second section. So now today I can unwrap them, and they're still quite wet in here, of course, because I wrapped them up. So I'm just going to remove this and move on to do the second section. I use this Batmate. I bought this in one of the pottery stores, but you can also make it yourself. I will get back to that, but I found that the almost same material is what you use to clean cars. So I will go to my local car shop and see if I can find something similar to this. The Batmate, this material that I put under the bat, is actually very helpful in making sure that your bats are not wobbling. Well, in this case, it actually is a little bit. I think it's okay now. It sort of glues it too, and well, it just makes it a little more stable. Before I throw this second part, I want to measure the width of the first part, because it has to be very precise, as I talked about in the past. So I'll just go do that. I'm going to be using a little less clay for the second section because it's not going to have a bottom. So I can make the same size with less clay. And also found that if you add the second section with a little less clay, you are adding less of a burden on the first section. So it's a little more safe to do that. This clay is actually a little more stiff. It's been on storage for some time than I like it to be. So it's a little more work, but it's actually okay because it also makes it more stable. And this time I'm going all the way down to the bed because, of course, we don't need a button on this for the second section. So now I'm ready with the second part, and the measurement is almost perfect. It could be a little bit slimmer, so I'm just gonna try and squeeze it in just a little bit. Yeah, I think this is perfect fit. So now I'm not gonna wait until tomorrow. So I'll just scrape off any excess slip from the outside, and then I will give it a quick dry with my blow dryer and make it stiff enough to hold its position when I turn it around. So you can do that if you are a little bit impatient, like I am now. I'll also scrape off the slip from the inside, because that's just gonna help it stabilize, dry a little better, quicker. So I'm mostly gonna dry the lower 80% because I want the connecting part to still be sort of wet. That will connect it better. Now I'll just let it spin for about the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. Again, in my experience, it's good to let the clay just settle a little bit. I don't know what it is. Maybe the water just distributes better. Or I call it settling. It seems to work better when I put the pieces together. So off to the coffee, and I'll be back in a minute. Now I'm back again. It feels good. You can sometimes like wriggle, try and wriggle it a little bit. And this one seems stiff enough to carry the weight. Before I move it, I'll just wet the top a little bit and just scratch it a little bit with a fork to make sure that the two sections connect really well. So I'm going to remove this and put the first section back on the wheel. One thing I forgot when I removed this was to mark which way on the wheel it is. The problem is that sometimes these beds are not completely centered, and then if you turn it around, it may be wobbling a little bit. But well, this one actually looks like it's good. So now I'll just do the same thing with this. I'll just wet the top. And I'll use my amazing scratch tool from the kitchen. So now it should stick together. Now I will turn the top and put it on top here. I'll just zoom out the camera a little bit. And as always, when you tip them around, you more or less have to throw it out and turn it, because if you tip it slowly, it's gonna bend. So I keep the bed like this and then turn it around, and I hope it sticks. It did! So, now we just have to see how well it fits. It looks pretty good. Yeah, and it's spinning somewhat even. And then I just knock a little bit, not too much, but just to be sure that it's connecting really well. And sometimes I just, use my fingers and connect it a little bit. Now I just scratch the two parts together a little bit. Again, it's just because I want to make sure that they're really well connected before I start mingling around with it. So now I think it's safe to remove it. I'll just cut it loose, and always keep my body on this on the bed to make sure that when I cut it loose, I don't push the top or the pot too much out of shape. So the first part, of course, always is to secure the connection here. That's the key thing in making sure that it's good. And it actually feels pretty good, this one. I'm also moving my fingers inside, up and down, to sort of massage it into place and get rid of any bubbles or anything that should prevent it from sticking together. So now it almost looks like it's one piece, right? So now I will just move up a little bit and make sure that the whole pot is still centered. And as you may notice, I'm not adding any water at this stage. Just trying to dry through it. The only thing is you have to be careful not to add too much torque to it, or because if you push it too much out of shape, you can lose the grip on the connection. When I get to the very top, I often need to add just a little bit of water. And it's not uncommon that I need to cut off the top. As you may see, it's not completely even, and I like to have an even top when I start throwing. So I'll just cut that. That's a little bit too fast. So now we have an even top and a pot that almost looks like it's made out of one piece. So I'm just gonna smooth it a little bit, make sure that it's completely centered, which it seems like it is. So at this point, I could just go ahead, add the texture, and start doing my shaping. But I could also do a little bit of wet trimming. So what is wet trimming? Well, it's trimming the pot when it's still wet. Usually when you do trimming, you would do it on a leather hard stage. But there can be several reasons and times when you want to do wet trimming. If you're done with your pot and you put it aside to dry, to get to the leather hard stage and do your trimming, if it's very thick, if you for whatever reason made it too thick, wet trimming will remove that outer layer that you don't need anyway. So removing it at a wet stage leaves only the part that actually needs to dry. So it's a faster way to dry your pot, and you get, to the stage you want, the shape you want. But in this case, I also want to do a little bit of wet trimming because after I apply the texture, of course, I can't do any trimming on the outside. I could do trimming on the inside, but only if I decide not to make a vase. If it's a vase, it's almost impossible to get inside and trim it. I'm thinking, who knows, maybe I will actually turn it into a huge pot or a bowl. I didn't think about that, but it might be a good idea. In that case, I need the thickness to be a little bigger. And I can, if it's a bowl, I can trim on the inside because you have the space to do that. Even though your pottery teacher may tell you you should never trim the inside, don't listen too much to that. Anyway, I will just try and get a feel to see how even the wall is, because I do want an even thickness of the wall. So that's one of my goals with the wet trimming. But I also want to take off maybe a little bit. But I'm going to use the Steve tool that I also showed in my last texture video. And that's a very dramatic tool. It's going to go very deep. It's going to make very deep, very wonderful textures. And so I do want a thick wall. The reason I'm starting with the Steve tool is that for the Steve tool, I don't need the expansion of the bowl or the pot to swirl. When I do the scratching, I like when I expand the bowl, the pot, I like it to swirl so that the textures are going to be moved around. That's going to be a little more difficult because, as I explained in the other video, when you wet your pot and lower the friction, it will swirl less. If it's more dry, it will swirl more. I don't need the swirling for this tool, so I can do it wet, and it will be easier to do this expansion on sectional pots when it's wet. So for those two reasons, I start out with the Steve tool. I also love it. It's such a wonderful little tool. And you may want to wet your arm when you're dealing with a deep pot like this, so you don't create any friction. When doing wet trimming, you have to be careful because, of course, the pieces you trim off is wet. So you want to grab them with your hand so that they don't stick to the pot. When you get to the top, you have to be a little more careful about how much pressure you apply, because otherwise you will bend it out of shape. So I think that's it. I just want to go over my surface with my rib, once again, my metal rib, to make sure that I have a clean surface. Now with this texturing tool, it's so dramatic that probably wouldn't matter, but still I like to have a clean surface, a clean canvas to work on. So now it's time for the texture tool. I always like to wet my tools. It's not so bad with these plastic tools, but if they're a little bit wet, they won't stick as much. I'm just going to support a little bit on the inside with my hand, again, to make sure that I don't push it too much out of shape. I'm going to leave the very top untextured. Now we got the first layer texture. And as you remember, if you saw that video, if you didn't, you should go and see it. I like to go over several times because this texture, it does look good. It will look even better when we expand it, but I like it to be even more dramatic. See, that's much better, but I still want to go a little more crazy. Now it's getting better. It's funny, but it also makes it a little softer. I think maybe this kind of massage it a bit. I do want the middle part to be a little deeper. I think it looks interesting now. Now, the question is, should it be a vase or should it be a bowl? I know it's very tall for a bowl, but I'm thinking it's so thick and it may be interesting to do sort of a bowl shape. That will expand it a lot, but I think we have the thickness to do it. So anyway, I think I will try it. And as always, when you're dealing with textured pot, try not to get water on the outside. I will now add some water on the inside because I want the clay to be a little softer than what it was after I dried it. I will sometimes be using a rib as it makes a little more of an even pressure. The downside of using the rib is that I don't get the same feel for the clay as I do with my fingers. It's definitely behaving a lot different than when I do it in one section. It's a little more wobbly. I did get this part to be maybe a little too wide, but there's nothing I can do about that now. So either I will have to continue out here and make it sort of a bowl, or I will have to make a little wider on this part just above it. I think I will have to, because it's got too weak down here, so I think I'll have to try it a little bit. And now, you see the problem? It's breaking apart. I simply made it too weak with this texture, and I don't think I can save this because you see now it's simply breaking apart. So I'm getting this big hole here. So I failed. I failed. Okay, we'll try the next one. The first one did not turn out so well, to say the least. But that's, of course, not going to stop me, because we have another section ready for, another first section ready to throw the second section. So I'm basically going to do the same, except this time I'm going to use a different technique. I'm going to use a scratch technique on the side. I was just looking for the scratch. I'll find that. It's not going to be as deep. I hope it will be a little more stable. So let's move on with that. Never let failures stop you. It's just a path on the road to success. So now I'm ready with the second section for the second pot, and I'm just going to try it, just like I did with the other one, to secure that it's stable enough. And then I'm going to attach it and see how that goes this time. Now, what the fuck is that? Now it's ready to be added to the first section. But before we move it, I just want to check. Yeah, it seemed solid enough. I'll just wet and scratch the top of this. So, so now I think we're ready for the texturing. With the bad experience I had with the first one, where I did some wet trimming, I think I'm not going to do it this time. I want to keep as much stability as possible. So I'll just Make sure that it's a clean surface. This texture is not going to be as deep. It's a surface scratching. So I'm hoping it's going to go better. Let's try and see. So I'm going to use this tool. It's the same one that I used in one of my previous videos. I'm going to use the small scratching. You could also have these wider ones, but the small ones seems to give really good results. And I'm not going to do the top because I'm pretty sure this is going to be a vase. So I'm going to make a small mark. Just going to make a small mark about here, I think. So this is where I will stop the scratching. I will take it all the way from the bottom because I'm going to trim that anyway. So here we go. So that was all the scratching. And of course you're going to have a lot of these little crumbles. Don't try and remove that now because it's wet. And if you try and do something, you're just going to smudge it into the pot, and the texture is going to be less vivid. Anyway, I just want to go through it and see. There was a couple of here that I think it looks okay. So now, of course, we can only touch it from the inside. First thing, just want to make sure that it's still circular and it's not too wobbly. And again, be careful with the sponge. Don't add any water. In this case, I don't want to add any water to the inside either because I want it to be as dry on the inside as possible, doing some level of dry throwing, because the more resistant the inside is going to be, the more it will turn, which is also putting a lot of stress on the connection. So I hope it works out. As always, go slow with your stretching. Don't do too much at a time. I better get the water out of the bottom now because it could be difficult very soon. I also want to make sure that the top doesn't expand. So just want to narrow that a little bit. It's clear to see that it's difficult to get an even stretching over where I put the pots together for some strange reason, because it was very well glued together to begin with. So maybe I have to add a little bit of water in there. So what I'm trying to do now is, because apparently I could not make it look very smooth over this connection. So instead of trying to hide it, I'm trying to highlight it. And it's definitely not going to be a very even vase. So instead of trying to do that, I will make it more bulby and see how that works out. It definitely didn't turn out the way I expected, but now I'm going to let it dry a little bit more so I can do some trimming of the foot and final adjustment of the shape, but because it's still a little bit weak now. Okay, this one definitely didn't turn out as expected. I failed again. I do that a lot. And to be honest, I'm actually sort of embarrassed because I took you through this whole video and we end up with this. So I was almost deciding not to post the video. But then again, I sort of hate these pottery channels where the perfect potter is doing perfect pottery all the time, because that's not reality. The reality is that you fail. Even professional potters, even potters that are doing production pottery, the same pots, the same glaze, the same firing, there's a certain percentage that comes out wrong. It could be inconsistency in the clay, glazes, things just like that happen. Even very, very good potters like Florian Gatsby, he actually posted a couple of really funny videos about his bloopers and fails. He does that too, and he's very, very good and experienced potter. We all fail, and especially if you, like me, like to experiment, try out new kind of clay, new way to shape clay, new ways to texture clay, new glazes, new way to apply the glazes and fire the pottery, you will fail, maybe more than average. But in the end, you're also most likely going to end up with something truly unique, truly yours, truly something that nobody saw before. And I think, just personally, that's much more interesting. Also, I failed in the way that this pot didn't turn out the way I wanted. And the first one, of course, completely failed. I'll reclaim that clay, so there's nothing wasted. I have a video about how to reclaim here on the channel, and an easy way. You can watch that if you want. But this one, I continued and tried to make some of it, It's definitely very different from what I thought it was going to be. I'll probably go a bit crazy with some glaze experiments on this, and maybe it will turn out an interesting and unique sculptural kind of ways. Maybe not, but I will let it go through the process. But I also learned a lot of things doing this. First of all, I think I'm now really getting the hand on doing sectional throwing. I think the part of putting the sections together and making sort of a nice and even sectional pot is now becoming easier for me. I've done a lot of them, and it does take time to perfect this. So that part of it, I think I actually did pretty well. That was successful. That was not a fail. But it was the texturing and expanding of the sectional pot. I never done that before, and that failed. I think one of the reasons is that I didn't anticipate how much strength you put on the pot when you expand it and it's sectional, so glued together. So what really essentially happened is that the two sections were glued together, and then when I expanded them, they sort of did like this. They opened up. So that suggests to me that even though the gluing of the attachment of the two sections was actually pretty good, and I think if I just had let it be that shape and fire them, they would have survived fine. But it was such a heavy strength I put on the pot when I started to expand it. And in addition to that, I added texture. And on the first pot that completely failed, the texture was very deep. Remember that Steve tool? It was a very deep texture. So that weakened the pot. As I think I mentioned on the way, I could actually feel on the way when I was doing it, it was feeling a little more wobbly or weak in a way. And that definitely didn't help. So what did I learn from this? Because I'm not going to stop. I am stupid. I will try it again someday, and maybe I will show it here on the channel. I think what I need to do is make walls thicker. I did make them thick, but I think for this kind of application, I think I need to make them even thicker. And by making them thicker, I can also dry them less when I put the sections together, because they're going to have so much internal strength that I'm not depending on the dryness. And by having thicker walls, a little more wet, I think they will glue better together, or I know they will glue better together, and I think it may be possible to extract them with less burden on the clay, because it will be more wet. And by making them thicker, the textures, even deep textures, won't compromise the strength of the clay as much. So I think that's something that I will try, at least. Maybe something interesting will come out of it in the end. Maybe not. Maybe this idea is doomed to fail, and I will never be able to do sectional pots with expandable textures. Who knows? But I will only find out by experimenting, and that is what I will recommend you do as well. I mean, that's what I find interesting about pottery, is exploring ways to shape and texture and glaze the clay. That's what drives me, at least. And it's also a way to get to something that is truly unique, that is truly your style. Of course, on that way, you're going to fail a lot, just like I do, but you also learn. So, I hope, despite all the failures in this video, that you still liked it. And if you did, please subscribe, like, share, comment, and please remember to hit that little bell button, because then you will be notified about new videos. And as I've been doing for quite some time now, I will post a new video every Sunday, a premiere at 5 p.m. Central European Time. You're welcome to join me in the premiere. I will be live on the chat. If you have any questions, we can take it on the way as the video goes. That's all I had today. So keep practicing, keep experimenting, and keep up the good mood, and hope to see you soon again.